I thought I was just a cleaner who couldn't help but organize books. Every night in Mr. Lane's enormous library, I'd dust the shelves and quietly rearrange his collection, leaving small reading suggestions by his chair, like literary breadcrumbs. I was convinced no one noticed my secret late-night librarianship, until one evening, he called me into his study and said the words that made my heart stop. "I know what you've been doing." In that instant, I was sure my life was over. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments, what's one book that changed your life? And if you enjoy stories about hidden talents, second chances, and the quiet magic of books, follow this page so you don't miss the next one. The Lane estate looked like something out of a novel, vast, intimidating, and filled with more wealth than most people see in a lifetime. I'd been working there for 6 months as part of the night cleaning crew, yet every time I walked through those marble halls, I felt like I didn't belong. My assigned area was the library, though calling it that felt like an understatement. It spanned 3 floors, lined with shelves that reached the ceiling, rolling ladders, cozy reading corners, and leather chairs worth more than my car. The collection could have made any university librarian cry with envy. Mr. Lane, the owner, was said to have over 50,000 books. The problem? There was no order to them. I learned that on my very first night, when I found a cookbook wedged between Nietzsche and Descartes, and a romance novel sitting beside a biography of Einstein. First editions of Dickens were scattered across different levels, as if someone had tossed them from a helicopter. It was pure literary chaos, and it made my English literature degree ache. I'd graduated from State University 3 years earlier, with a degree in English Lit and big dreams of working in publishing or academia. But dreams don't pay student loans. The job market for English majors was about as friendly as a locked library door. I'd applied to dozens of publishers, agencies, and universities. Each reply was the same: "We've gone with someone more experienced." The few interviews I did get ended with polite rejections and advice to keep building your portfolio. Meanwhile, my rent was due, and my savings were vanishing fast. So when my roommate mentioned her cleaning company needed night staff, good pay, flexible hours, no experience required, I swallowed my pride and applied. "It's temporary," I told myself, "just until something better comes along." That was 18 months ago. My parents tried to stay encouraging. "You start gaining life experience." My mom would remind me during our weekly calls. "You start still reading, still learning. The right opportunity will come." But standing in that magnificent library every night, surrounded by more books than most people see in a lifetime, felt like a quiet kind of punishment. I'd spent 4 years studying literature, written a thesis on unreliable narrators, and could discuss Toni Morrison's themes for hours. Yet I was being paid to dust the spines of books I longed to read. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was probably the most overqualified cleaner in the city, working in the most disorganized library imaginable. I tried to ignore it. My job was to clean, not critique a billionaire's filing system, but the disorder gnawed at me. These books deserved better. They deserved to be read, loved, and understood. So I started small. I grouped the poetry, gathered all the Shakespeare together, and created a proper section for modern fiction. Then I got braver. Mr. Lane had a reading chair, a massive leather armchair, near the tall windows, with a side table that always held his current read. The titles changed every few days, so I started to track his preferences. He read everything: fiction, biographies, science, philosophy, even mysteries. One night, I noticed he was reading To Kill a Mockingbird. The next evening, I placed Go Set a Watchman beside his chair with a small note written on an old library card: "If you enjoyed revisiting Scout as a child, you might find her as an adult equally compelling, though more complex." A fellow reader. I didn't dare sign my real name. If he complained, I needed plausible deniability. The book vanished the next night. Encouraged, I kept going. When I found him reading Murakami, I left the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle with a note about magical realism. After a Churchill biography, I suggested The Guns of August for another look at wartime leadership. Each time, the book disappeared, and so did my note. Slowly I noticed the library changing. Books were being returned to the sections I'd organized. Maybe someone else was doing it, I told myself. After all, wealthy people have staff for everything. But secretly, I hoped he was reading my recommendations, that my anonymous notes were sparking his curiosity. Somewhere in that vast, silent mansion, I wanted to believe someone was discovering new stories because of me. Gerard Lane was a legend in the tech world, and a ghost in his own home. In 6 months, I'd seen him maybe 5 times, always from a distance. He was younger than I'd expected, mid-40s, with dark hair that always looked slightly tulle, like he was lost in thought. His focus was intense, almost intimidating. The other staff spoke about him in hushed tones, and none of it was flattering. He'd once fired the librarian for moving a single book without permission and dismissed her on the spot. He once made the chef redo an entire dinner party because the salads were served on the wrong plates. The stories painted him as brilliant but impossible, successful but deeply private. He'd built a billion-dollar tech empire, but according to the staff, he trusted no one and liked even fewer. That made my quiet reorganization feel increasingly reckless. Every night, as I shifted books and left my little notes, I imagined the inevitable confrontation. "Well, Mr. Lane," I'd say, "I know you didn't ask for my opinion, but I thought you might enjoy Toni Morrison after that James Baldwin biography." It would be a very short conversation, ending with me being fired on the spot. But I couldn't stop. The library was too beautiful, too full of potential to leave in disarray, and the books I recommended kept disappearing, which had to mean something. I began noticing other details. His chair was always turned toward the best light. A pair of reading glasses sat on the side table, expensive, with a prescription for someone who clearly read often. Sometimes there were multiple bookmarks scattered nearby, as if he was reading several books at once. This wasn't a man who collected books for decoration. He truly read them, lived with them. One evening, I found a notebook beside his chair, filled with his handwriting. The open pages contained book notes, quotes, and reflections. The handwriting was neat but rushed, as if he was trying to trap ideas before they vanished. I didn't read it. That would have crossed a line. But it made me feel less alone. Somewhere in this vast house, there was someone else who believed books were worth thinking about, worth writing down. It made my secret project feel less like trespassing and more like collaboration. 3 weeks into my unapproved reorganization, I made a discovery that changed everything. While shelving poetry scattered across several floors, I realized the books I'd been recommending weren't just disappearing, they were being returned. Not at random, but carefully placed. The Toni Morrison I'd suggested after Baldwin now sat among African American literature. The Barbara Tuchman history I'd recommended had joined other narrative nonfiction. Someone wasn't just reading my suggestions, they were using them to build a broader system. Encouraged by the fact that my recommendations were being appreciated, I began leaving more detailed notes. Instead of merely suggesting books, I started drawing connections between authors, exploring shared themes, and explaining historical contexts that could deepen understanding. When I noticed him reading 1984, I left Brave New World with a note about how Orwell and Huxley had each imagined different yet equally unsettling futures. After a biography of Marie Curie, I suggested The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, discussing the overlap of science, ethics, and the human stories behind discovery. My notes became longer, more personal. I began sharing not only what he might enjoy, but why those books mattered to me, how they spoke to larger ideas about art, humanity, and the way we live. It felt like the kind of deep literary dialogue I'd always wanted, even if I was the only one actually speaking. Then one night, something stopped me cold. Next to his reading chair was a new notebook, different from the one I seen before. It was open to a page, clearly meant for me. In that familiar, precise handwriting were the words, "To my mysterious librarian, your recommendations have been extraordinary. Your insights are thoughtful and illuminating. I look forward to each new suggestion. Thank you for helping me see my own collection with new eyes. A grateful reader." I stared at the note for minutes, my hands trembling around my dustcloth. He knew, he'd known all along, and instead of being angry, he was thankful. I looked around the library with a new perspective. This wasn't my secret anymore. Somewhere in that vast house, someone valued what I was doing. For the first time since I started, I didn't feel like an intruder. I felt like a collaborator. That night, I left a longer note than usual, along with The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I wrote about the magic of libraries, about how books find their readers, and how stories connect strangers across time and space. For the first time, I signed my real name, Carrie. The call came the next morning, just as I was getting home from my shift. I'd been working at the estate for 7 months, and our quiet exchange had been going on for nearly 2. I'd grown comfortable, even confident enough to gently challenge his reading choices. "Miss Michaels," said a crisp, professional voice, "this is Margot, Mr. Lane's SIP's assistant. He SIP'd like to see you in his study at 2 p.m. My blood turned to ice. I said them sorry. "What?" "Mr. Lane would like to meet you today. Please use the main entrance." The main entrance, not the service door I'd used for months. That couldn't be good. I spent the next 4 hours in pure panic. He knew about the books, of course, but maybe he'd decided it had gone too far. Maybe I'd crossed a line with something I'd written. I thought about the note I'd left the night before, with the book thief. I'd written about the power of words, how stories survive even when everything else is lost. Maybe that was too personal. I changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on a simple black dress that felt appropriate for either a job interview or a firing. The main entrance to the Lane estate was even more intimidating in daylight. Marble steps led up to towering oak doors that looked older than the house itself. I rang the bell, my heart hammering. Margot greeted me, a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a reassuring smile. "Miss Michaels, right on time. Mr. Lane is expecting you." She guided me through bright hallways I'd only seen in shadows. The rooms were filled with priceless art and expensive furniture that somehow felt impersonal, like a museum where no one actually lived. The study, however, was different. It was smaller, cluttered, and alive, with the messiness of someone who actually worked there. Papers stacked, coffee cups, half-finished, and reading glasses scattered everywhere. And then, from a chair by the window, stood Gerard Lane. He was taller up close, his dark eyes sharp and observant, and he looked tired in a way that went deeper than lost sleep. "Miss Michaels," he said warmly, "thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." I sat gingerly on the edge of the leather chair, my hands folded in my lap like a student awaiting judgment. "I imagine you're wondering why I ask you here," he began. "I have some idea," I said quietly. "And I want to apologize. I know I crossed a line, touching your books, leaving notes. I shouldn't said have. I just couldn't said help it." He studied me for a moment, and I braced for the inevitable lecture about boundaries. Instead, he smiled slightly. "Miss Michaels," he said, settling into the chair across from me, "I want to show you something." He picked up a tablet and tapped the screen. "This is the library SEP security feed. I SEP been watching you work." My stomach dropped. Of course, there were cameras. I was about to be fired, or worse. But when he turned the screen toward me, I saw something unexpected. It was footage from the night before. Me moving books, dusting, leaving a note by his chair. Only the way he'd edited it looked less like surveillance and more like documentation. "I've been watching you reorganize my library for months," he said. "At first, I was furious. No one touches my books without permission. I nearly had you fired." I flinched. But then I started paying attention. You weren't set just moving books around. You were building systems, creating order. You were making the collection make sense. He gestured toward a stack of books on his desk. "And your recommendations, every single one of them, has been extraordinary." "I'm sorry," I murmured again, but he raised a hand. "Stop apologizing. You've done something remarkable. You've turned a chaotic archive into something meaningful, and introduced me to stories I never would have found." He walked to the window, pausing before speaking again. "Can I tell you something I haven't told anyone else?" I nodded, unsure what to expect. "But the knees, some going blind." The words hit like a stone in water, silent but devastating. "It's genetic," he continued softly. "Degenerative. I've known for 2 years, but it's progressing faster than expected. I can still see, but reading is getting harder. The words blur, especially in dim light. The doctors say I might have 6 months before I can read at all." He turned back to me, and I saw the ache in his expression. "Books have always been my escape. Through the chaos of running a company, the meetings, the endless stress, reading kept me sane. It was the only thing that ever felt real." He paused, then gestured toward the shelves beyond the door. "When the diagnosis came, I started buying books, rare editions, entire collections. I told myself I was preserving them, but really, I was hoarding them. I was surrounding myself with what I was about to lose." He sighed. 53,000 books, Miss Michaels. And I was drowning in them. They became a monument to loss instead of joy. Then you started reorganizing. You started talking to me through your notes. For the first time in months, books felt alive again, not as reminders of what I was losing, but as reminders of why I loved them. I finally found my voice. "Mr. Lane, I had no idea. I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry," he said firmly. "Be curious, because I have a proposal for you." He leaned forward, eyes steady. "I want to hire you, not as a cleaner, but as my personal librarian and reader. I want you to catalog my entire collection, read to me, and help me experience books in a new way. I want you to be my eyes in literature." I stared, certain I did misheard. What? The salary would be $150,000 a year, plus benefits and a housing allowance, if you choose to live on the estate. You still have full control over the library, acquisitions, organization, everything. My mind spun. $150,000. More than I'd earned in the past 3 years combined. Life-changing money. But more than that, you trusted me with your collection. Miss Michaels, you've already proven your dedication. You've treated my books with more care and insight than I have. You've shown me patterns I never noticed, introduced me to writers I might never have discovered, and reminded me why I fell in love with reading in the first place. He pulled a folder from his desk. "Never had my lawyers prepare a contract. Take it home, read it, think about it. But I truly hope you still say yes. I need someone who understands that books aren't just objects. They are doorways, and you already know how to open them." I agreed before even reading the contract. 3 weeks later, I was standing in the library, my library now, with a team of catalogers, new software, and a budget that seemed unreal. Mr. Lane, Gerard, as he asked me to call him, had given me complete creative freedom over the entire reorganization project. But the best part came in the afternoons. When the team left and it was just the two of us. I had never read aloud to another adult before, but Gerard was an attentive listener. He gave every word importance. When I read dialogue, he smiled at the voices I used for each character. When a passage struck him, he'd ask me to read it again. We began with The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, because I thought he'd enjoy its layered storytelling. He was fascinated by its structure, its complex characters, and its reflections on identity and transformation. "I never would sef pick this up on my own," he admitted one afternoon. "I would sef assumed it wasn't sef for me. But you sef are right. It's sef's brilliant." That became our pattern. I chose books that pushed his expectations, challenged his perspective, and exposed him to new ideas. We explored fiction, poetry, memoirs, classics he'd missed, and new works redefining modern literature. And we talked constantly about themes, characters, language, and the way stories shape how we see the world. They were the conversations I'd always dreamed of having, the ones I imagined in graduate school, happening every day in that quiet, beautiful library. Gerard was sharp, insightful, and unexpectedly witty. He had theories about unreliable narrators, strong opinions about the Oxford comma, could quote Shakespearean sonnets from memory, and had read every Agatha Christie novel twice. "You know," he said one afternoon, after I finished reading a passage from Beloved, "I used to think losing my sight meant losing books forever. But this is different, better in some ways. When you read, I hear details I missed when reading silently. The rhythm, the tone, the music in the words." "Really?" I asked. "Really," he said. "And having someone to talk to about the story right away, that's something I never had before. Reading used to be solitary. Now it feels like community." A few weeks later, while sipping coffee, he looked thoughtful. "Can I ask you something personal, Carrie?" "Of course. Where does this love of books come from? The way you talk about them, it sets not casual. There sets real passion behind it." I smiled, remembering. My grandmother, actually. She was a librarian in a small Oregon town. Every summer my parents sent me to stay with her, and she did let me help at the library. I was about 8, stamping due dates and shelving books, convinced I had the most important job in the world. "That sounds wonderful," he said. It was. But the real magic came at night. She'd make hot chocolate, and we'd sit in her living room, which was basically another library, and she'd read to me, not children's books, but Steinbeck, Harper Lee, even Dickens. When I got older, she'd stop and ask what I thought, like my opinion mattered. Gerard leaned forward, genuinely interested. "She sounds remarkable." She was. She used to say books were like people. Some you liked right away, some took time, and some challenged you in ways that made you better. She taught me that reading wasn't just entertainment. It was a conversation with the greatest minds in history. "Is that why you studied literature?" he asked. "Partly," I said. "But also because I wanted to understand why some stories stay with us forever while others fade. I thought I set become a professor or work in publishing, helping new voices reach the world." He waited as I smiled faintly, remembering. "What happened?" "Reality," I laughed. "Turns out the literary world is smaller, more competitive, and not exactly welcoming to recent graduates with big dreams and small savings. So you ended up cleaning instead of curating." "Yes," I admitted. "But funny enough, working in your library, even as a cleaner, felt closer to my grandmother Sip's world than any of those jobs. Being surrounded by books, even silently, felt like coming home." Gerard was quiet for a moment. "She be proud of you," he said. "You found a way to honor books, even when traditional paths were closed." "I hope so," I said softly. "She used to tell me, see, the right book finds you when you need it most. Accept it." I never thought that applied to jobs too. 6 months into my role, Gerard made another kind gesture. He'd noticed my long commute was costly and cutting into my reading time. "I have a suggestion," he said one afternoon. "There's a guest cottage on the property. It's fully furnished, has its own entrance, and is about a 5-minute walk from the library. Would you consider moving in? I can adjust your salary to include housing." I was stunned. The cottage was small but lovely, fireplace, modern kitchen, and windows overlooking the gardens. It meant saving money and being closer to work. "Are you sure?" I asked. "That seems like too much." "Carrie," he said, "you've transformed not just my library, but my entire relationship with books. Having you nearby lets me focus on literature instead of logistics. It makes sense for both of us, and I thought you might like living closer to the books." I moved in the following month. Living on the estate felt surreal at first, but quickly became comfortable. I could walk through the gardens to work, had space to unwind, and finally started paying off my student loans. But the best part was watching Gerard's joy return. The sadness that had once filled his eyes was gone, replaced by curiosity and energy. He'd gotten a golden retriever named Dickens and began attending literary events again, exploring stories in new ways. "You changed how I see literature," he told me one evening as we finished the midnight library. "I thought losing my sight meant losing stories, but it's helped me discover them in a deeper way." A year later, Gerard decided to open the library to the public. Once a week, we hosted reading groups, author events, and programs for local schools. The once private collection became a community space, a place where others could rediscover the same wonder that had brought us together. I still leave notes by his reading chair, sometimes. Old habits die hard, but now they're not secret recommendations. They're small exchanges between friends who both understand that books aren't just objects or decoration. They're connections between generations, perspectives, and people who might never have met without the magic of a shared story. And every afternoon, when I settle into my chair and hear Gerard's footsteps and Dickens' gentle breathing as they join me, I'm reminded that sometimes the best stories aren't the ones we read, they're the ones we live. A story about hidden talents, unexpected connections, and the transformative power of literature. What book would you recommend to someone trying to fall in love with reading again? Share your suggestions in the comments. If this story of books, second chances, and finding your calling touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more inspiring stories about discovering where you belong. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.